Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is Jackass Retro. My name is Matt, and this is part 2 of our Selling Postcards 101 series. Now, the reason for these videos is get asked a lot of times by people who watch my What Sold videos. How do you identify a postcard? What do I sell them for? Hopefully, this series will help you get started, get enough information to be dangerous to help start you on your journey of selling postcards online. So, this video is the first, most basic thing that I think is most important for people to learn when selling postcards, and that is learning your eras and types. So in this video, we're going to learn about the types and eras of postcards. We're going to cover undivided back, divided back, white border, linen postcards, chrome postcards, Continental postcards, and real photo postcards, or RPPCs. There are other types of postcards that you might run into, but these ones are the most common, the most likely you're going to run into out in the wild, and the ones that you really should become most familiar with. So we're going to start sort of and go more or less chronologically here. First of all, I want to let you know that if you want to know about dates, eBay actually makes it relatively easy. We're going to just change the view here. And if you go to the item specifics of a eBay listing, you're going to see this under the era. And if you just click on this little era over here, you're going to see this come up. This is not what you're looking for. You want to click again into the field, and look what we get. We get all the different ages of the postcards, and it gives you a good guide to the dates of creation. You'll see here undivided back from 1901 to 1907. The next ones are the divided back from 07 to 15, then white borders from 15 to 30. After white borders, we have the linens in the 30 to 45, and then chromes from around 1939 to the present. Now, these dates are approximate and only a guide, but also, means that you don't have to memorize right away these dates, right? So they're just a good way to kind of get your feet wet, and takes a little bit of the pressure off on having one less thing to memorize. So start with the first one. We have undivided back postcards. Now, these are pretty easy to identify. They're printed front. They've got a lot of negative space usually on the front of the card. Now, the reason why that was when postcards were still really beginning to be in use. The front of the card was for messages. The back of the card was for your address, and they were indicated usually as such. You can see down here, it says this side for address, and this side would be for your messages. So people would write their messages often in very small writing in any piece of negative space, even sometimes right over the image. And so you'll see that negative space a lot of the time because people needed space to write. You'll also see, typically because of that, a lot of absence of very dark areas of the postcard. The publishers wanted to make sure people had as much, space to write as they could, so they could fill in as much space as they could if they wanted to. If we flip over to the back of the card, you'll usually see a 1 cent or 2 cent stamp box or stamp, depending on if it's posted or unposted. And a quick note here as well, since we're starting at the beginning, is unlike a lot of collectors' niches, postcards often, whether or not it's been used or it's unused, doesn't really always have an effect on its value or desirability. And it's unique among many collectibles niches in that way. If it's got writing on it, doesn't mean it's worthless, right? Sometimes the value of the card is exactly what's written on it. So keep that in mind moving forward. Posted cards or unposted, used or unused, doesn't always have an effect on the value of a card. And the most easy thing to identify an undivided back postcard is, well, if you flip it over, you're going to see a big blank back. There's no line here down the middle dividing a side for message and addressee. So in comparison, we can see here, undivided back, no line. Divided back has a line, right? There's going to be a line or some text here to divide the side for the address over here on the right and the message here on the left. So pretty easy to identify that first era of postcard. Now, right around 1908, the post office, through an act of Congress, actually made it legal to have the reverse of the postcard, address and message share the same side of the card if there was a dividing line. And what that allowed to do is you're going to see printed fronts of the postcard that usually will take up the entire field of the front of the postcard. You're going to see minimal negative space, right? We see a lot more dark and full colors here. All right. If we flip over the card, we'll see continued use of the 1 cent, 2 cent stamp or box. And you will see this here dividing line right down the middle where the address on one side, the address on the right side and the correspondence on the left side. It usually will have a title indicating as much, right? So we've got the correspondence and the address. So pretty easy to identify a lot of divided back postcards. Now, up here I said the minimal negative space on the front. Usually, there are exceptions always. In everything in postcards, it seems there's always exceptions to the rule. So just keep that in mind, is that, these are guides, it's not going to fit every single possible case. All right, the next era of postcards, which brings us up around to right about the beginning of World War I, and which is around 1915, a little bit before, but is the white border era of postcards. Now, the white border of era of postcards came about for one reason: cost savings. Postcard publishers realized they could save up to 20% on ink by removing the printing from the field along the edges of the postcard. So that's what they did, and they saved up to 20% by doing that. You're going to see still have a smooth front printed field. And I mentioned that primarily because that's going to be helpful in the next era. Other than that, not a lot has changed. Oops, sorry about that. Postmark can be a clue. All right. So you see a postmark in 1915 or 1916, and it's got a white border. Well, that's going to help you in identifying it. We'll find out why in just a minute. We still have the dividing line here, but more commonly, you'll see the publisher printed or some information printed here as the dividing line. So that's another sort of beginning of the use of this method at the beginning of the white border era. So it can be another tool to help you identify it. Now, the problem in identifying white border postcards is our next printing process was introduced. Right here, we have the exact same art used for two different postcards from two different eras. These postcards were probably printed close to 20 years apart from each other. Maybe not quite that long, but almost. Same view, same angles, same art. On the left, we have a white border postcard. On the right, we have a linen postcard. So how do we tell the difference? Well, we have to get a magnifying glass and look very closely at the card. I definitely recommend purchasing a jeweler's loupe or magnifying glass if you're going to start dealing with postcards. I use one almost every day, and they're going to be one of the tools of the trade. If we look at either of these postcards under magnification, we'll see the white border postcard has a typically slick printed front. The linen postcard, however, will have a textured front, and you'll often see these little crosshatches. Now, part of understanding this is also understanding why this exists. White border postcards, as we mentioned earlier, they introduced the white border to save on ink, right? They didn't need to use as much ink. Same, more or less, is true on the linen postcards. The textured border was introduced because they found that they could use less ink, and the ink dried faster because it was exposed to more air due to more surface area. So it means they could print them faster. They needed to have less space for them to dry, so they could print more and faster. So that's why we have a linen postcard. And they're called linen postcards not because they're made out of linen, although you will see sometimes actual postcards printed on linen, but mainly due to their resemblance to linen, right? That cross-hatching to increase surface area has the feel in the hand and also the appearance of linen. So that's how we have linen postcards. So in identifying them, we're going to have that textured crosshatch that we see under magnification. The one we've been looking at has a border, but not all linen postcards will have borders. Sometimes they will have a full printed front, and you might have to identify a linen postcard against a divided back postcard. And the way you'll do that is to go back to that textured crosshatching. Once again, there's exceptions to every rule here. Postmarks can often be a clue, although they're not the steadfast and 100% indicator like we'd like them to be, because we know that these were produced from late 30s up until the early 50s. And still, we see the publisher text often used as the dividing line between correspondence and address. So moving on, we go to our next era of postcards, which is probably the one that you are most familiar with because it's our modern era of postcards, also known as chrome postcards. Now these, we see glossy finish, we see photographic images. Now, during World War II, the printing processes had made great strides, but really had not been able to be put into use and for mass production until the end of the war. But here we see now that, we have these technologies and these, they're put into use, and you have really bright, vibrant, lifelike colors usually. Usually, there are black and white chrome postcards as well. So it's not always going to be full color. There are more modern printed black and white chrome postcards as well. We also see a thinner cardboard stock than we had in the linen postcards, more similar to the divided back or undivided back eras, but not exactly. It is just a different kind of cardboard stock, and you'll know when you hold it in your hand, you'll be able to feel a little bit thinner, but no less sturdy cardboard stock. Now, also in our modern era, we see Continental postcards, which really are exactly like a normal chrome postcards, which are, but they're enlarged from the standard 3.5 by 5.5 inches to a huge 4.4 by 6 inches. Now, that's really usually the same art is used often, but it's just on a bigger postcard. Now, the one thing I will mention if you're just getting started is the collector's market for postcards really is much more focused on the standard size 3.5 by 5.5 inch postcards. The 4 by 6 postcards, at this point in time while we're making the video, really does not have the same collector's market. They're usually sell for quite a bit less money, and they're really not as widely collected. There are exceptions, things like, depending on content, really is what it comes down to. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to, start a business or include postcards as part of your business. The ones that are going to sell most regularly and successfully are the standard sized and not Continental postcards. Now we move on to real photo postcards. Now this is one of those things where I think a lot of people have a lot of difficulty in knowing what is a real photo postcard. It's one that people often hear about as being like the most valuable or whatever, and sometimes that's true, but it can be very difficult in being able to identify what is a real photo postcard and what's not. And a lot of people make mistakes. I made them all the time myself when I was first getting started listing postcards. And it's easy to see why. On the right, we have a real photo postcard of the Grand March at Tacoma Stadium in 1910. On the left, we have a printed postcard depicting that same image. Now, if you're doing research on the postcard on the left and you happen to see a listing for the postcard on the right, which shows the exact same image, you might be inclined to think that the postcard in your hand is a real photo, when in fact it is not. It may have used a photograph as its source image, but it is in fact a printed postcard. Now, how do we know? How do you know? Well, hopefully you still have that magnifying glass we were using earlier, and you look at it under magnification. On a printed postcard, you're going to see these printing dots, and that's what you're looking for. On the right, you're not going to see printing dots. It looks a little pixelated just due to my screen, unfortunately, but you won't see any dots, printing dots on a photograph. And the reason why is just in how it was made. On the left, it was printed using a lithograph machine or printing press or and some other means similar. And so that you're going to see these little dots that make up an image. On the right, a real photo postcard is made to a photographic printing process. Now you can see the modern version of this as well. If you grab any photograph really that's been developed, and say the cover of a magazine and look at it under magnification, you'll be able to tell the difference the same way. The cover of a magazine, if you look closely enough, is going to have the same printing dots. The photograph that you've had developed will not. It's going to be a single developed image all the way through. So when identifying a real photo postcard, you're going to see a glossy photograph surface. You're not going to see any printing dots, right? You can, if you'd like, cross-check the stamp box at plale.com real photo. Now there will be a link to that in the description. It's definitely a site I recommend you bookmark. It can help you date and identify real photo postcards by the stamp box. And it's printed on photo paper that's not just plain cardboard. It's actual photographic paper. So, some tools of the trade. Buy a magnifying glass or a jeweler's loupe, and there's going to be a link in the description for that. Metro Postcard, which I didn't mention earlier, has a lot of great resources on different printing processes of postcards. There's a lot more information there than what we provided here. This was really just intended as an introduction and an overview. And finally is Plale's Postcards /real photo. It's a great resource for identifying real photo postcards just based on their stamp box and backs. And that is going to be it for this video. Thank you all very much for watching. On the next video, we will be going over research and pricing of postcards. It's going to be a little bit less PowerPointy on that one and a little bit more hands-on demonstration. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. If it's your first time here, if you have questions, please leave them in the comments, or you can hop into one of our live chats that happen almost every day, and feel free to use the resources there. I want to thank you very much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.